I can live in this history of Derwent. And I want to, again, make mention of the seniors. And, of course, that would be Mr. and Mrs. Hicks. There. Where are they? They were here today, and it was a thrill to see them. And I can remember them as clear as a bell right now. They were our neighbors right there. And, of course, that was back when we had the little phone, you know, phone 7, phone 21, phone where had the exchange there. But getting on, I can talk forever. Getting on, we want to do a little more reminiscing. We want to do that with Mr. Paul Persina.
Thank you, Gary. All you people gathered here, the dignitaries that spoke, and I know all you representing the town of Derwent since it began, and ladies and gentlemen, I'm not presently a resident of Derwent. Sometimes I wish I still was. When you mention Derwent, I'm a little bit ancient, a little bit old. I was born in the 20s, and I think I was born a bit before Derwent originated. I'd like to say that the origin of Derwent, the actual grassroots of Derwent, originated from a little district called Angle Lake. It's not existent anymore. It was about 7 miles north of Derwent. As a little boy, I remember Gustav Algot, who would be Gary's grandfather. He had a grocery store there and the Angle Lake Post Office. It covered a great territory for both mail and groceries and what you have. About that time, the Canadian Pacific Railway was pushing west. Like the old story used to say, go west, young man, while you're still young. Anyway, when the line was completed from Lloydminster to Edmonton, it seemed like little towns flocked up along the railroad because they knew there was transportation and they knew there was freight and so on. And old Gustav Algot could see the future. He moved that store from Angle Lake, and I remember distinctly as a little boy, I remember the time he moved it to Derwent. I think at that time, I was too little to know, but I think at that time there had already been some general stores here. I think it was Frank Ilku and Kobolnik with the red and white store. But Gustav Algot saw the future of this country. He turned his store into an implement and hardware store. And from that little store emerged what you call the McCormick Deering Company. Later on, as you would know, it was the International Harvester. And it did serve the whole area here. In fact, I remember, even then as a little boy, my dad bought the thresh machine and tractor in 1929 from Gustav Algot. Talking about Derwent and how it progressed, the railway brought everything into here. I remember it was Vic Christensen, I think, who opened up the creamery store here in Derwent. There was a daily train in the early morning. It was about 8 o'clock. It would be going west. And you'd be surprised to see all those cream cans on the train. The funniest part is that was a moonshine area at that time. Everybody had a little bit of white lightning. And if you took a look at the creamery cans that came into the creamery there, and if you saw that they were smudged with fire and slightly burnt and battered, you knew that fella made moonshine. He covered the top, threw in a copper pipe, and made white lightning. That big creamery supplied all the farmers with pocket money. Every household had a few cows, and they had a little bit of cream to sell. And of course, you brought it into town, and that paid for the groceries or whatever. And if I can relate a little story, I've been told it was true, and I think it's true. The only thing is I can't mention the names. There were settlers here. Some of them were foreigners. This particular couple, the wife happened to be quite elite. She couldn't talk English. She only spoke Ukrainian, I think it was. She couldn't read or write. But she worked hard milking those cows, and somehow she convinced her husband that if he gave her every third check, she would save it up and she'd buy something real great in the fall. That's exactly what happened. Every third check, he gave her a little slip of paper. She tucked it away, saved it. When the fall came just before Christmas, she made a trip to Vermilion. She went to the Craig store. Those of you who remember the store, Craig's. She turned these little coupons over and expected to buy something. What they turned out to be were just the slips off the cream delivery. The old man spent the checks himself. So I imagine there was a little bit of fur flying at that time. That, before you have the power up here, Bill and John Gregolock ran a power plant just back of their garage. And Gene Lemiski would probably remember that. The power only ran till midnight. And I remember Jim Gregolock used to stay up late to make sure that he shut the power off at 12. And he would spend his time at the Branskys, stringing jokes and trying to keep people awake, so he stayed awake so he could shut the power off at 12. Another thing I'd like to say then, when I mentioned the Branskys, I'll bet those of you here who knew Derwent or were in Derwent would agree with me that nobody, but nobody ever made a cup of coffee like Mrs. Debransky. The town people, not only the town people, the farm people would gather here, and usually about coffee time, 10 o'clock in the morning and about 3:30 afternoon, everybody would gather at the coffee shop. At that time, only 10 cents a cup, I think. And they'd throw dice, roll dice for whoever had to pay for the coffee. Now, also, I could mention, somebody mentioned here the stockyard that they had here. This is one of the biggest stockyards, I think, on this line at the time. And that was run by Mr. Meerman, I believe it was. Later, it was taken over, I think, by John Fedetsko. I remember as a kid, there were no trucks in those days, and if you wanted to get your cow to market, you had to drive it. So it was just like the Western days. You'd see cowboys on horseback driving their cattle in, all down the road and through the streets of Derwent and into the stockyards to get them shipped. Somebody mentioned that the post office, Hicks, I remember that distinctly, Mr. Hicks of the first post office. When I left the town, I think Albert Wilmer was the postmaster at that time. We had a police detachment here, which was one of the first almost on this line, and I remember that was in the days of Joe Pook, who was a police sergeant. Derwent was great in sports. They had a wonderful ball team, and ball was quite popular at that time. They had one of the best pitchers, I think, that I ever have seen throw a ball. Unfortunately, he's not with us. We lost him during the war. That was Walter Bobber. I know the first curling rink came here. That was almost one of the first in the area. Like Derwent was also always very, very, very popular with their sports. I don't know how much more I can say. I left Derwent in 1956, and there's times I wish that I would have stayed, because judging by all you people here, I think it was one of the darndest, bestest villages, country town, anywhere between here and Edmonton. And it's a shame to see that it faded the way it did. But with you people coming here, bringing all these memories, I think it really did Derwent justice. Thank you. That's about all I can say.